Hello, welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. I'm your host, Veronica Andrews. I have a very interesting, mind-snapping book today, Three Flames, and the author is with us, Alan Lightman, and it's about Cambodia. Why Cambodia? Why, were you there? Did you fall off a plane or something to wind up there?
I've been going to Cambodia since 2003, and I went there on my first trip with a friend who had been doing humanitarian work there, and I wanted to see what he was doing, and I sort of got captured by the country, and I've made 2 trips a year since 2003.
That's a long plane ride.
It's a long plane ride. It's about 24 hours over 2 flights, yeah.
Wow. I don't think we know much about Cambodia. I don't. But it's not progressive country. Are there cities like Hong Kong that are more modern? This is basically rural.
It does have a few cities in it. It's not nearly as developed as Hong Kong or Bangkok or Singapore. But in the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a huge amount of development, mainly from foreign investment, and most of that is from Chinese and Korea. So it has changed a lot in the last 6 or 7 years. It's still the poorest country in Southeast Asia, despite the recent development.
But you can be happy for them or not, because with development, their life as they know it is gone.
Well, it's not gone in the countryside. They're still...
but they'll stay the same. The development in the big cities won't reach them. It might make their life harder. Down go their trees. There goes their animal population. So it in some ways it makes their life better, and in some ways
Right.
it makes it worse.
Yeah, that's right. The standard of living in general is going up slowly, and there are more and more people getting educated. But the rural areas where 80% of the population lives, there are many houses, most of them without electricity or plumbing.
And up on stilts.
Up on stilts for the monsoons, the heavy rains, and farming is still the principal occupation of most of the people.
Which is a difficult crop. You have to really watch it like a child almost.
Right. Of course, most Americans, the few Americans who know anything about Cambodia remember it from the Vietnam War, where the U.S. bombed Cambodia when we thought that the North Vietnamese were using them as a harbor. And you would think that the Cambodians would hate the Americans, but since the Vietnam War, a lot of Americans have done good social work there, so they're actually friendly towards Americans.
Well, thank God. There's not too many people in this world that do these days. When they find out that we are friendly and we're well-intended, that usually, they've never had that. They've never felt it. They've never had somebody on this side of the life treat them like they wanted to be treated. I'm amazed in Belgium. Every Memorial Day and Veterans Day, the entire community goes to the American cemeteries and decorates American graves. That's their way of saying thank you for freeing us. And that's what, 60 years now?
Yeah.
So, well, that's good to know. I just hope that it works for them. But I was thinking on the way down here, their husbands are chosen for them. They're given away like fodder.
The girls.
Yeah. Is that such a bad idea? When you look at what young people are going through today, 13, 14, 15, acting like they're married. In our world, they were dating. They were going steady. You broke up, and that was the end of it. Now, they're committing suicide. They're killing one another. The drama, the heartache, and the pain that comes out of our marvelous American society. I don't know, maybe the ladies in Cambodia not marrying for love, but then you don't want that for an individual.
Yeah, well, they're still mostly arranged marriages, and of course, I talk about that a lot in the book. I think in the cities, which are more connected to the Western world, that Western culture is slowly transforming the society there, and I think that some of the young women in the cities now are marrying later and
Choosing.
for love and choosing their own husbands. But in the countryside, it's still the case that most Cambodian girls are taken out of school at age 12 or 13, put to work on the rice fields, married at age 16 or 17 in arranged marriages, and really have no life other than being a housewife and working on the farm.
And I don't think they even have the status of housewife, especially if their mother-in-law moves in.
They don't have very high status. There's a Cambodian set of rules for girls that I mention obliquely in the book. It's called the Shabab Saray, and it's taught by families to their female children, and it says that girls must be completely obedient to their husbands when they grow up. That's one of the rules. You're supposed to keep the three flames. One of the flames is where the title of the book comes from. One of the flames is not to speak badly about your husband outside of the house. The second is to remember always to serve your parents. Of course, in Asian society in general, there's a huge obligation of children to take care of their parents and be totally loyal to them. And the third flame is always be obedient to your husband. And those rules of behavior for girls are still taught
from
now.
day one.
In 2019, still taught to girls.
So your Hopwell Foundation, what do you want to teach them, that they don't have to live like that?
Well, this is a nonprofit that I started shortly after my first trip to Cambodia, and where I got all the stories to make the book. We've been very careful about not to impose Western culture on the young people that we deal with there.
Do you remember the Pilgrims and the Puritans?
Yes. No, there's a great tradition of American and Western
we
imperialism.
are, therefore you must
Exactly. So what the nonprofit does is it builds dormitories and has an in-house program in critical thinking and leadership skills. But once you teach young people critical thinking, very quickly you're challenging some of the traditions. And the principal tradition that we are challenging is that girls and women should be obedient to men. That once you teach a young woman independent thinking and critical thinking, she's going to challenge that particular tradition. So that's the one tradition that we're willing to challenge. And of course, in the novel, the female daughters of the dictatorial father, some of them attempt to challenge him, but it's the youngest daughter that I think challenges him the most. So she's challenging the tradition of the society.
But in teaching them to challenge, do you teach them alternatives? Because once they leave you and try to implement what they've learned on their own, it's not going to be easy.
Well, you give a young person critical thinking tools, but then you don't tell them what to do after that. That would be a contradiction to what you're trying to convey to them. You teach them how to think independently, and then you trust them to make good choices for themselves when they leave the dormitory, when they graduate from college, when they start their careers. You've given them the tools, or tried to give them the tools, to make choices for themselves. And of course, one of the things we hope our graduates will do is to improve the society. I mean, that's why we get funding, is because people want to improve the country. And so we hope that our female graduates will make positive change in their society.
I fear for them what they're going to be up against in the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
Those who will not have a change, those who will
Right.
not respect what the girls are
Right,
doing.
yeah. Well, I wish I could choose every one of their husbands for them. So far, they haven't let me do that. But
Well, you know, sometimes left up to a higher power, the choice is better,
yes,
you know. So if
yeah.
you give them the skills, how many girls are enrolled? How many graduate?
well, we have in our organization, the Hartsell Foundation, we have 2 facilities. We have 80 current students, and we have about 160 graduates.
Good for you.
And we have 10 years of graduates, and they're moving into positions of leadership as teachers, as project managers of NGOs and nonprofits, as journalists, as businesswomen, as lawyers. Some of them work in the government. And so we're hoping that
You're getting there.
we're getting there. We hope in another 10 or 15 years that they will be the leaders of the country. They're on their way.
Now, this is your, what, 25th book? All
Something like
told?
that.
Yeah, something like that. No, a piece of cake. Will you write a follow-up? Will you write about the Hopwell and what it does, and if they've made those benchmarks that they want to do?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this book, Three Flames, is not about the Hartsell Foundation.
No, but
it's a novel where the stories have come from what I've learned in the country.
but you would hope
Yes.
that there was a Hopwell Foundation, and I'm grateful that there is.
Mm-hmm.
I applaud your efforts and hope that the kids who graduate from your tutorials would have a happier book, because it's sad.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I hope I'll live long enough to see that.
I'm going to challenge you to do that. How long did it take to put it together?
Well, the book came together over a period of about 5 or 6 years, and I didn't write it at one shot. I wrote one story. It's the opening story, in which the mother of the family sees in the market the man who murdered her father in the Khmer Rouge camps. And I thought that would just be a standalone story, a short story, and that would be it. But over the next several years, I began thinking about the other members of the family and wondering about their characters, what their lives were like. I mean, when you write when you create a character, a fictional character, they stay in your mind and they start talking to you.
I saw an author last night who said exactly the same thing, and
Yeah.
it has taken on a life of its own.
It takes on a life of its own. So over the next few years, I heard those other family members talking to me and beginning to tell me their stories. So I started writing the book one chapter at a time, telling the stories of the other family members. Then, of course, I had to weave it all together. But it was about 6 years from start to finish. But it starts and fits and starts over that period of time.
And was it immediately published? Did somebody immediately pick it up?
Pretty quickly. Published by Counterpoint Press in Berkeley, California. They're small but a really excellent press. They want to publish literary books. They're not interested in making huge amounts of profit.
Wow.
I think that a lot of people in the publishing industry that I've come into contact with over 30 years, they're in it because they love it. There are very few people in the publishing industry who are in it to make money. They believe in the power of literature, the power of stories, the power of education, changing people's lives through stories and relating to other people, and it's really a wonderful
I was
enterprise.
afraid when computers first come in, and I still break out in a rash when I go near one, that books would become obsolete.
Yeah.
That, and there was maybe 4 or 5 years where there was almost a dearth. And then I went into a store one day, and I saw all the books that you needed to make the computer work. And And I
So you
went,
need books for that
yeah,
reason,
what was
right?
I mean, remember when they first come out, everything had a manual, everything
Yeah.
had directions
Yeah.
and data, and I can actually remember when they were going to make our life easier, and there'd be less paper. And in fact, I have had instances when I was searching for someone who needed a kidney transplant. I was grateful the computer helped me. You know, emergency situations, something that was absolutely necessary. But there's sometimes when they don't. And as we were speaking, I don't want to become dependent on it. I
On the
remember,
computer.
yeah, I remember the great power outages.
Yeah.
And I brought up the camp lantern and the camp stove and
Yeah.
lit the house, and everybody thought I had a compressor or a
Right.
thing generator to keep lights on. I saw people go crazy.
Well, it is amazing how dependent we've become on computers and carrying our smartphones with us everywhere, and you know, when you're taking a walk in the woods, instead of looking around at the trees, looking at your smartphone. And
How has the book been received? Do you get much feedback?
it's been received very well from the people who've read it. Now, I think that some people are suspicious of a white American writing about Cambodians 12 time zones away. And
I didn't trip over that one.
well, the Cambodians who've read it say that it's very authentic. And I certainly had it vetted before publishing it to make sure that I didn't make any cultural errors.
You'd be afraid to go back. Where do you stay? When you go, do you stay in the countryside or in the city?
Well, I make visits to the countryside, but since my dormitories are in Phnom Penh, the capital city, I spend most of my time in Phnom Penh.
Well, that makes sense. And when will you go back again?
My next trip is in January.
This coming January?
Yeah, I go twice a year.
Twice a year.
Yeah.
It's good to meet somebody who believes that sincerely in what they've found to be their life's work.
Well, we're all looking to make a difference somehow,
Yeah,
aren't we?
yeah, and grateful for the opportunities when we can. You got another book in mind?
I do have another book in mind. It will be a collection of essays that are, the title of the book is going to be Between Nothingness and Infinity.
Okay, sounds like Toy Story.
Yeah, but I'm philosophically inclined, and I think some of the most interesting questions are, where do we come from? Human beings, where did the earth come from? Where did the universe come from? That's the nothingness side. And where are we going? You know, what will human beings be like 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now? Will we have computer chips implanted in our brains that connect us directly to the internet? How are we evolving, and what's going to happen to the earth 1,000 years from now? The universe, we think, is infinite, so that's the infinity side of the title. So,
How big a book is it going to be?
it's not going to be infinite.
I play a game, or we play a game. What today will be an antique of value 100 years from today? You know how we look at an old cast iron stove done in chrome. Wow. No, and it's hard. It's hard to find something.
It's possible that automobiles will be an antique, because with the increasing pollution of cars, I think more and more cities are trying to beef up their public transportation. And it may be at some time in the future impossible to drive a car into the center of a city. I think there's some cities...
It's impossible right now.
But some cities, I think London, already have laws about that. And so it's possible that eventually people will not have private cars.
Okay, they'll find another way to insure us. We're going to break right now, and if you would please prepare to read us your style and let us know a little bit more about Three Flames. We will be back.
Ryna had just finished putting a quarter kilo of pork and a half dozen rambutan into her burlap shopping bag, wondering if her husband would scold her for spending too much, when she saw the man who had murdered her father. At first she wasn't sure. She hadn't seen the man for 33 years, since she was 12 years old, and he was now whitened and bent over and barely able to support his skinny body with his walking stick. But he had the same crooked mouth and angular cheeks that she remembered, the same mole above his left eye. And as she studied him from 3 stalls away, she became more and more certain. Many times over the years since the war, she imagined what she would do if she ever saw him again. What she most wished for was some catastrophe to permanently separate him from his family, as it happened to her family, or for him to be stricken with cancer and die a slow and painful death. That evening, after her husband had finished eating his dinner, Ryna said to him, "I think I saw Toot Ping in the market this morning." The smell of the pork blended with the odor of mildew always present during the rainy season. "Who?" said Pick, wiping his mouth. "The commander of the camp at Sopek Mangol." She looked over at Pick through the dim yellow light and tried to read his expression. The one room of the house was lit only by a single bulb, which dangled from wires that ran along the tin roof, down a wall made of packed palm leaves, around the 2 storage bags of corn and rice, and finally to a car battery in the corner. "Why are you talking about him?" said Pick, annoyed. "And anyway, how do you know it was him? It's been so many years." "Do you remember when I saw Cousin Mala after 40 years? You didn't believe me then either." Pick didn't bother replying. He was sharpening the blade of his plow, which he would need to finish preparing his fields for planting. Sharpening blades was their son Kamal's job, but Kamal was out as usual, drinking cheap wine in the rain with his friends. Pick stood and began putting his tools away. He was not much taller than his wife and almost as thin, with fleshy lips, perpetually bloodshot eyes, and a scar on his cheek where he'd been gored by a neighbor's ox. Now the rain was pinging like gunshots on the tin roof, causing the 2 oxen under the house to shift nervously. "What should we do?" said Ryna. "What's there to do?" said Pick. "Why do you want to think about such a useless thing? It's a waste of time. And tomorrow, don't buy any rambutan." Pick was always especially unpleasant the day after he'd spent the night with Lakina. "I am doing," said Ryna. "I don't know what." "What are you going to do?" said Pick. "Something," said Ryna, unsettled. She sat down to Thida, her eldest daughter, who began brushing her mother's hair. At age 16, Thida had gone to Phnom Penh to work off a family debt. She'd been back home for a year, eating regularly, but her wrists were still as thin as a cucumber. And she sometimes began screaming in the middle of the night. Their middle daughter, Nita, Pick had married off at age 16 to a traveling rubber merchant who promptly deposited his new wife for safekeeping with his aunt on the far side of Battambang province. But at least Ryna still had her youngest daughter, Sreypov, her Mion, still in school at Ryna's fierce insistence. Ryna closed her eyes, hoping the long brushstrokes would calm her. "I've had enough of silly talk for the day," said Pick. "I'm getting old, and tomorrow is almost here." Without bothering to take off his sweaty shirt, he lay down on his sleeping mat. Almost immediately, Sreypov and Thida disappeared behind the dangling sheet that partitioned off the tiny area where they undressed and slept.
Will you do on tape? Would you ever read it out loud for those who can't read the book, who can't?
Yes.
Would you read it? Your voice is mesmerizing.
I've already done that.
Oh, excellent.
It's out on tape.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a good thing to know. So many people
Yes.
are the readers.
Like to hear it on tape.
Well, they can't read anymore. They can't see it.
Right.
They can't focus on it. And to have them on tape or on CD, whatever they do, makes a big difference, especially handicapped people. So thank you very much for that. You paint a very real picture. Maybe that's why I thought it's so sad. I lived such a good life and such a lucky life.
Many of us do here in the U.S.
And it's really sad. I'm not sure I could survive. I love the part when she gets perturbed at the husband. He has to sleep under the house with the cows. I thought he deserved that one.
And worse, yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't let him back in personally. I'd throw him the sheet, you know. But I've had the luxury of independence. I've had the luxury of education. I scare most people, and that cuts my work in half.
But I think many Americans don't. We take for granted the comfortable life we have, and I know that there's some Americans who do not have comfortable lives. But on the whole, compared to other countries, we have comfortable lives. And unless you've traveled and seen other parts of the world, you don't.
Or it's brought to us in a book.
Or it's brought to us in a book or a film. You don't really know how lucky we have it.
Busy, overworked, and undernourished.
Yeah.
Yep, we are, aren't we? We have never known a hungry night, gone to sleep with our bellies empty, and not known what, you know, the next day will bring, life or death. Thank you for educating me. I appreciate it. Will you come back with a follow-up, even if it's 15 years?
If you'll talk to me, I'll come back.
I'll give it a try. 3 Flames. Very deep, pensive learning experience. Thank you for being with us. Have a good one. Veronica Andrews, for now.